Erstmal würde ich sagen, vielen Dank für die Einladung. Und dann würde ich sagen, es tut mir leid, ich kann das nicht alles auf Deutsch schaffen. Vielleicht nächstes Jahr kann ich alles auf Deutsch machen, aber bis jetzt bin ich noch nicht so weit und so werde ich wechseln. Uh, in the introduction, I wear with pride the title of Old Rabbit in net neutrality debate. What that means for you, I hope, is that I will be able to explain net neutrality, a quite complicated subject, in simple terms. Because at the end of the day, the problem of net neutrality is a simple one. The solutions may be complicated, the debates about it may be complicated, but the basic problem is a simple one. And for policymakers and for participants in the media marketplace, I think it is important for us to focus on the most important details, the basic problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start for you at the place that I began, which was as an academic. I began my career doing a PhD on the subject of technology transition. At every moment of technology transition, from newspapers to radio, radio to television, television to cable, cable to the internet, you have a policy moment. A moment when government seeks to set the rules for the new marketplace for the delivery of mass media. We had one at 3 or 4 different moments in the 20th century. I spent my PhD studying those moments. And I learned enough to know that this was really interesting. And if you could be in the space of policymaking at a moment of technology transition, you could do really interesting things. And so when I finished my PhD, I left the academy and I went to Washington and I worked on Capitol Hill, and I started as an entry-level legislative staffer. I was just an average citizen who spent my time in the university. I didn't know how Washington worked. I thought I will come in and learn it from the ground up. I spent 2 years before I had enough. But I learned the way politics works, and I learned how the market was being shaped and who the players were and what the debate was like about the future of the internet, and how Washington was thinking about how to set the rules of the road for the future of the internet. And I left Capitol Hill because I was fascinated by the idea that at this moment in time, when technology was shifting to a new form, when the internet was becoming dominant in social, economic, and political life, when Washington was setting the rules for what the market would look like for the future of digital content delivery, the public had absolutely no idea what was going on. Never heard of the agencies who were making the rules, didn't understand the basic ideas of what the debate was all about, no idea. So with a couple of my former professors and some friends of mine from Washington, we started an organization called Free Press. And the whole idea was, let's tell some people about what's going on, let's help them understand it, and then let's show them how to participate in that debate. Because unlike every other media transition in the 20th century, the internet gives you the opportunity to inform people in real time and organize them in real time to participate in a political debate. When policymakers made the shift from radio to broadcast television, when policymakers made the shift from broadcasting to cable, it was years before the average consumer understood what had happened. At that point, it was too late to do anything about it. With the internet, things have changed. We can expect a different kind of debate. Now, we thought, well, we'll start with this issue called net neutrality. It's a little bit complicated, but that's the basic idea that we need to be focused on. And can we really expect people to understand this? And will people get organized? We thought, well, if we can get 10,000 people to pay attention to net neutrality, that will be a useful contribution. And over the course of the next 3 years, more than 3 million people became involved in a movement known as Save the Internet. And the idea of net neutrality entered the political space of Washington politics as a common, well-understood idea. Quite remarkable, and in a singular moment in the history of technology policy. And basically, what we realized is, even though the term net neutrality is hard to understand, the basic idea is obvious to people. They see it every time they open their computer. Because net neutrality basically describes a design principle of the internet, what the engineers who built it call end-to-end or E to E, the idea that anyone on the internet can reach anyone else on the internet, and no one in between has anything to say about it other than to deliver the traffic from one side of the network to the other. And while the content is on the network, it is treated without discrimination. My content is treated no different than your content, it's treated no different than your content. A perfect marketplace of ideas where everyone has the same opportunity to build an audience. This idea of non-discrimination is the basic premise of why people believed and still believe that the internet is different and perhaps more democratic than any other media form in history. Non-discrimination delivers social and economic benefits because it lowers the barriers to entry into the marketplace of ideas. It allows everyone with a good idea or an important voice or a constituency to reach to have a platform. Whether you're an individual with a blog or you're a major newspaper with a website. Non-discrimination, the end-to-end principle, the expectation of an open marketplace is what people understand now when they hear the words net neutrality. Now, I want to make clear that this is more than just mass media, although mass media is a core and important part of it. And the reason why it's more is because for the first time, the internet does something that no other technology has ever done before. It takes the three major information systems of modern society and condenses it onto the same infrastructure. So what we can look at, we have the infrastructure of our economy that used to be the transportation network. When you put your goods on a boat in the 18th century and sent them to your customers over the ocean, you included the bill of sale and you included your list of inventory for the next order. The information networks of the economy were the shipping lanes, and then the railroads, and then the highways, and then the skyways, and now increasingly the information networks of our economy are on the internet. And we can look at mass media, and we've talked about that already, newspapers, radio, television, internet. Transition is clear, paradigm shifts. But we can also think about personal communications, and we can see it going from the postal service to the telegraph, to the telephone, and then to the internet. And now, every one of you who has a smartphone can take out a device in your pocket and access any one of these information networks at the same time on the same screen on a little application called Facebook. This is a revolution in the way information is produced and consumed. And net neutrality, the idea of non-discrimination, the basic notion of an open marketplace, is core to why people believe the internet is transformational. So let me go put my professor cap on for a minute and explain a little bit about how the net neutrality debate came to be, because the internet was around for a decade before anybody said net neutrality. Why? Why did we suddenly have the net neutrality debate? We had the net neutrality debate beginning in around 2004 because of a technological development. So I've picked this picture off the internet. It was made by a US government agency to model what the internet looks like. For many of you, this will be familiar. For others, this will look like a crazy Rorschach test. But imagine that each of these circles are major telecommunications centers that will have lots of wires going in and out of them, and some of those wires go into your neighborhood, and ultimately one of them connects to your house so that you can get access to the internet. Now what I want to do is zoom in. So now what we're looking at here with these routers, these are three of those circles that you saw on this diagram. Those routers are near your house, and what happens is the traffic that goes from the internet is flowing through those routers, and it's heading down towards a router that's close to you and finally comes to your house. And as you'll see, all the traffic, all the little bubbles flowing along the wires are basically the same. The routers don't care what kind of traffic is being sent down them. They just know that traffic is headed to you. And their job is to deliver that traffic for you. So we'll zoom even further in, and we can see that ultimately, as the global internet gets closer and closer to you, the wire narrows. The amount of capacity available to deliver content to your house ultimately has to go down one line. And there's one router that's sitting in between you and the house. And I'm simplifying here for all of you network experts, but basically this is the right idea. 2000, 2001, 2002, a new technology began to hit the market, became more sophisticated. It had been around for a while, but it became more powerful, known as deep packet inspection, DPI. Sounds ominous. It is a little ominous, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, deep packet inspection. But what it does is it enables something called policy-based routing. That basically means that you can put something in this box that will allow you to see what that packet is and decide what you want to do with it if you want to do something other than just send it in on a first-come, first-served basis. And so policy-based routing allows you to do something like this. You say, well, from now on, what we're going to do is we're going to put a filter in front of that router, and we're going to take a look at every packet that's coming across into the router. And if we have business arrangement with company pink and company yellow, well, as soon as they hit that filter, what we're going to do is we're going to send them to the front of the queue. They're going to get priority treatment. We're going to create a business model in order to do that. Now, why would I ever do that? If I'm company pink or company yellow, why would I ever do that? I would only do that if there's a problem in the network known as congestion, which means if I pay for that priority and I get paid to get to the front of the queue as company yellow or company pink, the quality of service to the end user, to that household, goes up, and my content and my service performs better than everybody else's. That's a key leap in the logic of how the internet can be routed. When there is congestion, when there is a problem with too many packets going into this router at once, I can buy my way to the front of the line. Policy-based routing. And here's the kicker. The problem is if there's too much congestion in the head of that router, what happens is packet loss. These guys who are not at the front of the line, they go to the trash. That means your service, your content, not only is not performing as well as company pink and company yellow, your service may not work at all. Now, as you might be thinking through the logic of this, well, this only matters if there's congestion in that router. If there are too many packets trying to get through there, then that router can handle at that one time. Keep that in the back of your mind. Because that idea of congestion being a new kind of business model is what led to the debate about net neutrality. As it used to be, if I'm a network operator and I have congestion on my network, the only choice I have is to upgrade my network, to increase the amount of capacity that is available in those wires to deliver content to my consumer. Otherwise, my consumer is going to switch providers because I'm delivering a bad service. But now I have a different choice. Now I can say, well, I'm sorry guys, we have congestion, and you broadcasters and you movie studios out there who are filling my pipes with real-time video, I have a solution for you, and it's called give me some money. And I have a new incentive not to fix the congestion, but to monetize the congestion. That is a key point in the history of this debate. Keep it in mind, because it explains why there is this question of what's to be done, because it's a business model option. Now I can choose. I can choose to upgrade my network and increase the capacity, which is very expensive. Or I can monetize that congestion. I can take advantage of my existing facilities and make their liabilities into assets. The business office is just snapping their fingers and dancing because this is a great solution to what is otherwise an infrastructure problem. This guy, Tim Wu, he was a professor at Columbia Law School. He figured this out in 2002. He wrote a paper where he predicted this would happen. And you think, wow, this guy's a genius. He must have foresight into the future of technology. Truth is, before Tim became a professor, he worked at a Silicon Valley startup that was making deep packet inspection routers to do exactly that. He built the first generation of policy-based routers that were designed to monetize congestion, and he was so afraid of what the implications were that he left the industry, and he wrote what is now a famous paper called Net Neutrality, where he predicted this debate and predicted the conflict. That was 2002. It took Congress 4 years to get around to figuring out how to deal with this issue. And I was sitting in the The big vote on net neutrality came in 2006. It was a vote in a Senate committee about whether the vote was not should we have net neutrality or should we leave it to the market, which is the debate today. The vote was should we proactively kill net neutrality and give permission to every network operator to do whatever they want and break the non-discrimination principle. And this gentleman here, who's now dead, Ted Stevens, was the chairman of the committee, and he famously said, the internet is not something you just dump something on. It's not a big truck. It's a series of tubes. And someone was in the audience and recorded that little phrase and put it on YouTube that afternoon, and it became a viral sensation. Anytime you hear anybody say the internet is tubes or a series of tubes, that came from Ted Stevens, age 85 when he was chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, trying to understand what the hell people were talking about when they were dealing with the net neutrality issue. I tell you the story about Ted Stevens not to make fun of him. He was a nice old man. I liked him. But to show you that German politicians aren't the first ones to be confused about net neutrality. This is a pretty well-established sport in politics to misunderstand technology policy. But that doesn't make it right, and we have to figure out a way to solve this problem. And there was a guy came along in 2008, ran for president, called Barack Obama. He was the first presidential candidate to say, I understand technology, and I'm for net neutrality, and we need to put that in the law. And so Barack Obama's Federal Communications Commission, our Bundesnetzagentur, tried to do exactly that. And in 2010, they passed a rule called the Open Internet Rule, otherwise known as net neutrality. They rebranded it Open Internet because net neutrality is so hard to understand on Capitol Hill. And this is what they said. They said, if you're using a PC, you need to have non-discrimination. There can be no monetization of congestion. And if you're on a laptop, there can be no monetization of congestion. There has to be non-discrimination. But if you're on a tablet or if you're on a smartphone using a mobile network, well, we don't know about that. We'll decide that later. Stupid idea, but they did it anyway. They're about to go to the Court of Appeals now 3 years later. 3 years later. We started in 2002. We're about to hit the Court of Appeals more than 10 years later on the first regulation on net neutrality in Washington, and pretty much every expert in the city believes the Court of Appeals is going to throw it out. Not because the rule is based on bad facts, because Congress never passed a law that gave the FCC the authority to regulate the internet. They're a phone regulator. They're a broadcast regulator, not an internet regulator. We need the legislature to pass a law to make things clear. Great idea, because our legislature is so successful at solving problems these days. So here we are. Our good friends at Deutsche Telekom have reminded us again of the net neutrality debate. But again, what I want to say about Deutsche Telekom is no one should be surprised that they're doing this. This is perfectly rational and logical. If they weren't doing this, they would not be doing their jobs. They would not be responsible to their shareholders. This is not Deutsche Telekom's problem. This is a policy problem. It is government's failure to solve the net neutrality problem that forces companies to do what they are designed to do, which is try to maximize revenues and minimize costs. So we expect that they will do this. They have to do this. Unless government says, no, there's a higher public interest in maintaining an open marketplace of ideas, a non-discriminatory internet that does not permit the monetization of congestion, does not permit a pay-for-play internet where one company gets an advantage over another, where a commercial actor gets an advantage over a non-commercial actor. Deutsche Telekom is responding to this idea of creative destruction. Many of you are familiar with this in the broadcast industry. These new technology comes along and they blow open the old business model. If you're a telephone company, what that means is that your revenues on the old telephone lines are going down, and the amount of money that you're making on DSL is flatlining because cable modem is in the market and they're destroying your market share. Telephone companies are pretty desperate to find new sources of revenue. Net neutrality is an obvious place for them to go to try to monetize the assets they have in the ground, which in this case is a congested copper wire coming to your house. You cannot be surprised that they're doing that. What we have now, because government has failed to solve this problem, is not net neutrality, but net uncertainty. Years and years and years of going around in a circle on this debate. I've been doing it 10 years. Many of you have been involved as long. Because we haven't, as a policy matter, put our hands around the basic idea and made a decision about what we want as a society. We just are content to tug back and forth at the same rope. Here's the basic principle that I want to leave you with. The ideas that I've been presenting lead up to this, which is that you have to decide as a policy matter whether the internet is primarily a public good, an information infrastructure that delivers important services to every citizen and consumer in the country, or if it is primarily a commercial service. The real problem is that the regulatory system that was designed for the internet in its early days never anticipated that it would become the most important information infrastructure in history. It was designed to be regulated as a commercial service, and now it is a public good. What do you do about that? Well, in the net neutrality debate, remember monetizing scarcity, monetizing congestion versus expanding infrastructure. Basically, this idea is a business model of abundance versus a business model of scarcity. And put that in the context of public goods and commercial services. If I'm Deutsche Telekom, it makes absolutely perfect sense for me to make a revenue stream out of my congested copper wire. That's money in my door. As a commercial service provider, that is my job. But what that does is it gives me an incentive not to upgrade my network because I'm making money because it's congested. If there was no congestion on my network, I wouldn't have anything to sell in the terms of prioritization. I have to have congestion in order for that business model to be relevant. Well, that's fine if you're the network operator in a commercial marketplace, but if you decide as a government, as a society, that you want a public infrastructure that has abundant bandwidth, because that is a higher good, a more important goal, what's good for Deutsche Telekom, what's good for network operators, not good for the society. Because that means you're falling behind in the race to have high-capacity networks that drive your innovation economy, that drive the digital ecosystem, to support the famous startup economy here in Berlin. If we have a business model built on abundance, we are moving in the direction of a public good. If we have a business model based on commercial service, we are leaving it up to the market. There are good arguments on both sides of that debate. Policymakers have to decide which way they want to go. That's net neutrality. My views on the matter are clear, but it is a legitimate policy debate. We just haven't had it in these terms. So we're at a crossroads. We have to decide, because if you decide, hey, this makes perfect sense, buddy, thanks for clarifying. We want a business model of abundance, and we want a public good as an infrastructure, and we want everybody to have 100 megabits per second, and we want the same principle of non-discrimination to apply to HD virtual reality as we do for email and text messages. What are you going to do about that? Well, that opens a whole bunch of other problems, because Deutsche Telekom doesn't have the money to build the 100 megabit fiber network everywhere, all over the country to every household. That public infrastructure then becomes the problem of the society and the government to help build. So when you get on board for net neutrality and non-discrimination, that's great, and that's an important move, but that's the entry point to your next set of broadband problems, which is, okay, now you're responsible for building a public infrastructure, and you're responsible for this marketplace, which is now both public and private. That's your crossroads. One way you can begin to look at this without making the most decisive decisions is to look at putting in place more transparency requirements, things like open data. Right now, none of you, and me included, have any idea where congestion exists on the networks in Germany, or anywhere else in the world for that matter. The only people who know are the owners of the networks, and they only know where congestion exists on their network. So if I'm the Bundesnetzagentur, or I'm the Bundestag, or I'm the Enquete-Commission on the internet, I am reliant on the data provided to me by the network operators who are self-interested in the matter about where congestion is. If I was a content creator who was pushing data down that line to my consumers, I would want to know, where is the congestion? Because if there's no congestion, you're selling me a bunch of hot air when you are offering me prioritization. And if there is congestion, I want to know why you're not fixing it. Because isn't that in the best interest of the country? More data leads to better policy outcomes and perhaps relieves you of the need to make this hard decision about how to turn this into a problem that the average citizen can understand. What the average citizen understands is there's a lot of money in this debate. And where there's a lot of money, there tends to be political outcomes that are not exactly rational. Net neutrality is an interesting one in that there's a lot of money on both sides of this debate, which is why it's been a stalemate for so long. Why no one seems to be able to solve it, because there's too much money on both sides, and it just leads to a deadlock every time. What we need to do, in my opinion, is include more people in this debate. The Bundesnetzagentur cannot be the sole arbiter of all that is net neutrality. There are 3 or 4 experts, or even if there are a dozen, trying to figure out, piece together the data that are provided to them by the network operators to see where their congestion is and try to provide the Bundestag with decent advice about how to make a law. That ain't enough. More people need to be involved in this debate, including all of you, including the Landesmedienanstalten, who are trying to figure out what is their role as protectors of consumers and promoters of the public interest and media diversity in the internet age. I would argue it is about public education, about this choice between commercial services and public goods, abundance and scarcity, because at the end of the day, the real decision makers about the future of the internet in this country and in any country are the people. And right now, they're only barely involved in the net neutrality debate, and until there is greater transparency, better education, and serious involvement of the consumer and the citizen in understanding the consequences of the net neutrality debate, I predict we will continue to go around in a circle. Thank you very much.